I call to order the City Council meeting of Thursday, September 12th, 2019. It's roughly 7:33 p.m. We're in City Council chambers tonight. Please rise for the invocation by Councilman Noviello and remain standing for the flag salute and roll call.
Once again, we are engaged in the business of the city. We take our tasks seriously as we put our best efforts forward to represent our citizens in the best possible manner. We strive to produce outcomes that best serve our citizens both at the present and for the future. Within that, we are fortunate to have service providers and first responders at our disposal who take pride in their work and in their city. I take this time to quickly thank them for their efforts and results, and I also thank our many citizens for their volunteer efforts and the pride they themselves have for our city. It's that pride that serves to make our city better and better each and every day. Thank you.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Mr. Noviello. I said flag salute and roll call, I noticed, because it's written down on our sheet. So we'll take the roll call, and as far as I can tell, only Councilwoman Fosnot is not here tonight, so we're all here and accounted for. Approve the City Council minutes dated 8/29/19. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second. Motion and a second. Discussion or questions, corrections from council tonight? Hearing none. Mr. Lubin?
Yes.
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 Yes. Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Lubin. And Mrs. Frank is absent tonight, obviously, so Mr. Lubin is doing double duty as solicitor and doing the clerical work of the meeting tonight. And we thank you for that, Mr. Lubin. We'll try to be easy on you. Limited courtesy of the floor, we have no requests tonight. So we move to item 5, presentation of census information. And tonight we have Michael D. Berger, who is Philadelphia Regional Census Center specialist. And we welcome you to the podium tonight. And for the record of the minutes, could you please give your name and the thing that I just
Surely.
referenced?
Again, you had said it very correctly. Name is Michael Berger, resident of Lycoming County, actually Montoursville. But I would also like to start with an opening and basically saying to Councilman Noviello, your opening was extremely apropos for what we are going to deal with and what I'd like to talk about tonight. I don't want to know, I've talked to most of the boroughs and municipalities in the area. Unfortunately, they put a time limit on something, so I'm not really going to go too terribly long. But I also, like Mr. Slaughter, we gauge our audiences by classroom mentalities. We can tell when we've had a long day. And as I've said to Mr. Allison and Ms. Gatz, I've been on the road since about 7 o'clock this morning, was down in Allentown at 9 o'clock in Hazleton this morning, so this is a wonderful cap-off of the evening. Very simply, let's start with the census. The first census was in 1790. Okay? None of us were around back then, we think. But the important part was, in 1790, Washington was president for all of 6 months. It was a constitutional requirement that the census be taken. Thomas Jefferson was his Secretary of State, who was in charge of conducting the census. It took 6 months to do the census back then. Well, logic says it was all on horseback. We had to cover a territory from Georgia all the way to Maine, up and down the East Coast. When the census was finally tabulated and the numbers were reported to President Washington and Jefferson, the population count came in at 3.9 million people. Now, the fun thing was Washington disagreed with the number, and so did Jefferson. Both thought it was higher and lower. So the census very simply is what's changed in 300 years. The count was close. Our objective as citizens, as public, as representatives, as Mr. Noviello said, is to put the best foot forward, to do the best we can with the future in mind. Williamsport is a concern for right now. I lost my thought. Census is, first off, constitutionally required. It is a 10-year activity. The numbers that are reported and tabulated in the next year will be set for Williamsport for the next 10 years through 2030. Side note, I also have areas in Bradford County. So my representation area is Lycoming, Sullivan, Tioga, and Bradford County. Part of Bradford County, there's a little borough that had a population count in 2010 that on tax rolls and physically there were 1,500 people. After the 2010 census, the population came to about 800. That's roughly a 50% decrease in population. That population decrease also affected the borough's HUD money, CDBG money, education for the school district, police force, fire, anything that comes and trickles down through the federal government. That borough appealed. They lost the appeal. There was no documentation to support it, except the borough said, we know these people are here, here are the tax records, here is what is being proven. Census basically said, sorry. The numbers were not filled. The census forms were not completed. Can't really do anything. The concern for Williamsport and Lycoming County and Tioga County and Sullivan and Bradford, and as Mr. Allison said, all of Pennsylvania, is to develop a complete, accurate count. If we do not do that, Pennsylvania will lose representatives in the U.S. House of Representatives. We will also lose a fair chunk of money. The function of the census is threefold, primarily to do a head count for the United States government. In 1790, as I said, the population was 3.9 million. In 2010, it was around 305 million people. The estimate today for 2020 will be somewhere in the 330 million persons range. Pennsylvania, if we don't do the count properly, again, we'll lose a representative, potentially two. Well, where do they go? Where the population is counted. As a history teacher of 25 years, I have seen Pennsylvania go from 29 representatives to 19 currently. That's a significant loss of population. That representation, that population has easily shifted to the southern states, to the Southwest, and to the West Coast. We have lost political influence. That's population number one, or reason number one. Reason number two is also very simply financial. The federal government has, in its discretionary budget, roughly $675 billion. That money is allocated based on per capita, populations, and as a direct result to the census. So again, if we go back to that little borough in Bradford County that lost 50% of its population, let's project what would happen to Williamsport if Williamsport took its population of 30,000 and for whatever reason cut it in half to 15,000. HUD money, CDBG, public transportation, roads, infrastructure, flood monies would all be cut roughly in half. Now, Council, in your packets that were presented and prepared by Janice, you do have some statistical information, and I'll just say this for the public record. What I'm going to rattle off here is all able to be found on the Census government site, and it's 2020census.gov or census.gov. So unfortunately for public, this is just earshot information. We measure response rates both on a historical and a projected basis. What I have done for Lycoming County is I've broken down all the different tracts, census regions in the county, and as well as for the city. In Lycoming County as a whole, the non-response rate, or in other words, those people who do not fill out the census, comes in at around 24.5%. 1 out of 4 people. That's a significant percentage of the population. In Williamsport, the mean average is 25.3%. Still, 1 out of 4. The median average, we'll do the math for Mr. Slaughter, 22.6%. Okay, so we're still up in the 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 range. Now, there are significant areas in the city that have a very high non-response score. Specifically, in and around through the Lycoming College area, in and around through the Bishop Newman, St. John Newman area, in and around Pennsylvania College of Technology. Those 3 areas individually, respectively, have a 26.8, a 22.8, and a 34.4% non-response rate. Those numbers need to improve. Okay, so the question becomes, how do we do that? How do we get the population to be more engaged, to be more active, to understand the value of the census, what it means for the future, as Mr. Noviello said in the beginning, of this city? The initiatives that are taken by the census right now are to begin what's called a complete count committee. That will be a group of public-minded folks, social leaders, business leaders, municipal leaders, anybody else, who want to take part and use their resources to spread the word, to do what I am doing today, and what I have been doing all day today, to say what the importance of the census is, what it means for the future of the city. This complete count committee will probably have about 20 people on it. There is no magic number, but there is a good cross-sectional representation that Mayor Campana and I have talked about. And we've come up with a couple names that, you know, his mind was thinking one way and I was thinking another way. That group will begin meeting sometime this month. It will be a public meeting. It will be something that can be shared. It will have reports back to council. It will be very open because the need is there. I guess the other important thing to say is this. As the census moves closer, I'll give you a little timeline also. As the census moves closer, what is happening right now, August through October, will be what are called address canvassers. Address canvassers are folks that are hired by the census to simply verify a person's address to make sure that it is a single-family dwelling or that it is a rental with multi-units, or identify also where there are new constructions that have been put together in the last 10 years. All that information will be compiled, matched up with the U.S. Post Office to create a master mailing list that will be used in January. In January of 2020 will be the beginning of the national advertising campaigns. In February of next year will be what are called group quarters. That will be Lycoming College, count. Penn College, count. Mansfield University for my end. All of the nursing homes, assisted living centers that are in the county and in the city. Those are all called group quarters. They will be contacted, they will figure out how they want to do their census, and we'll use that information as the beginning of the process. In March of next year, we, the general public, myself included, will get a mailing. It will clearly say, U.S. Department of Commerce, Census Bureau, 2020. It will be a perforated envelope. Inside that perforated envelope, what we are used to, here's going to be a difference, What we are used to seeing for the last 10, 20 years or so is tear off the envelope and we do the old Scantron thing. Fill in the bubbles, answer the questions, mail it back. Well, that's part of the problem. Census did not keep up with technology. This year, beginning in March, there will be 2 other additional options for people to respond to the census. Option number 1 will be using your phone, right? Regular landline and/or cell phone. Type in the phone number, answer the questions, answer the prompts, use your keypad, bang, done. Okay? Privacy, security, nobody comes knocking at your door. That's what we don't like. Option number 2 will be to do the same thing via the internet. Go into the HTTPS site, fill in the appropriate prompts, click submit, and you're done. Unto itself, the hope, cross your fingers, is that people will do that in the privacy of their home and respond and increase the response rates. If the people do not, if the public does not respond, the same thing will happen, as has always happened. After tax time of next year, the enumerators will come knocking and say, geez, I'm sorry, did you forget to fill out your census? Can we do it right now? And they'll come around with iPads and they'll have appropriate badge work and everything. All census folks are FBI vetted. So there is a very secure and safe process. I will say this, my FBI background check took 3 months. Not that there's anything wrong, but it took them that long to go back 40 years. The census will be also recruiting for jobs. In Lycoming County unto itself, we will be looking for up to 1,000 people with a pay rate somewhere between $12 and $16 an hour, between 15 and 35 hours a week. Okay. Good job. It's fairly well secure. A lot of it's based from home. The website for that very simply is 2020census.gov/jobs. And again, all of this is public information on the 2020 Census.gov site. I come to the council tonight to not only pass this information on, but say to you, there is action that's needed. There is the complete count committee that will begin. There is and are partnership opportunities for the city and council and individuals to step up and say, we understand this. What can we do for the benefit of the community? How can we do this for the benefit of the community? This morning when I was down in Allentown, Nazareth area, I ended my presentation PowerPoint with a little visual for the audience. And if you will, I'll just kind of paint the picture for you. The second to the last image was that of a stone being thrown into a pool of water. Plunk. Little pool of water popping up, and the ripples beginning. And I stopped at that point and said, that's just me. That's one person with one stone being thrown into the water. How many ripples will that stone trickle out before they fade? Click the PowerPoint. It was a pond with multiple ripples, multiple droplets. So that's what needs to happen. We need to have multiple people, multiple facets, big stones being thrown into the water and cast out to make the ripples effective so that they rotate out and affect everyone. With that, I'll say thank you to council, and I'll say, are there any questions?
I had a question about the 2 college areas in town. Are the students counted in that?
The populations of any group quarters, which like Lycoming College and Penn College would be considered group quarters, are considered to be residents of the city, A, because they are here most of the time, and that's a quote from census language, and B, reside and have their residence in a certain place most of the time. So if we consider that Penn College began in August and is here through May, and Lycoming basically has the same time frame, then yes, they are here residents of the city and Lycoming County, and therefore the Commonwealth. They should be counted in the city population. We, the coordinators, myself included, have begun to make the initiatives to both institutions to say we need to outreach. We need to talk to the student body population, to the student governments, to the campus activities board, to the sororities and fraternities, and any other organization that's on campus to make sure that this happens. To the same degree, I have already taken an initiative to talk to the nursing homes in the community and say the same thing. Your residents, your clientele are here, be it in county or in city and in county. We need to take that initiative. So yes, the groundwork has been laid. All right, we're beginning the process. It's not complete yet. As the semester moves on, more activity will happen.
Thank you. And one other thing, the last census, of course, well, we had probably just gotten on council. Is there anything that, in other areas that councils have done to cooperate or partner?
The biggest things that are being looked at right now, one is very simply, as you just initiated and said, partnerships, to say we can add this to the social media links. We can do this in-house. We can do this via community newsletters. Thursday of next week, I'm already involved, and as I was saying to you privately this morning, earlier, that there is a good-sized meeting that I kind of have to blow off my team meeting because my priority is here. And that team meeting that I will be here for has a membership of about 90 service organizations in the city and in the county, and that is my ripple. If I get those 90, they spread out to other people, and they spread out to more people, the service and their clientele becomes more informed, more apt to respond. So I can say to my team leader, sorry, I can't do our team meeting of 15. This is more important. I get more bang for the buck. And that's, again, where I come from. In terms of advertising, not really. It's not there yet. In terms of using individual social media resources and talking it up, essentially, that's the simple goal. Right? We're of the same age, and I can go back and say this with a little bit of memory for both of us, that back in the 70s, there was a commercial called, a hair product called Brex, and the commercial was two women, blonde and a brunette, and they would say, well, we'll tell two friends, and they'll tell two friends, and by the time the commercial was done, the entire screen was filled up with half-inch blocks of people. It's the same thing with social media. But the goal is to get the word out, to engage, to educate, to talk to folks, and get folks to understand it's important. Now, as I said to you earlier also, I see different avenues on how to do that. Right? I see obviously the colleges as a big need, okay? But it's not just the colleges. Right? There's also an under age 5 population that is of concern for the census. Well, here's my logic. If you have a child and they're under age 5, they should be counted. You know you're going to count that individual child on your taxes. They don't go hand in hand, but yet that child is, for some reason, not counted on the census. Why parents don't do that? Nobody has a clue. Right? But to do that outreach means Head Start, STEP. Already done, already worked with them. UPMC, United Way. They're all agencies that are well within and on board this Complete Count Committee and have already partnered with the initiatives that we've made, especially in the county. I look forward to their partnering and their time and their leadership and their dedication, because also their monies trickle down through the federal government to their operations. It's a vested interest on both sides.
Thank you. Ms. Mila.
Speaking of tax day, is there any sort of outreach at the post office on tax day or anything like that?
I don't really know. I would say this very logically, that as we get our mailings, mailings will start to come to individual homeowners mid-March, roughly. They should be done and they should be completed within about 2 weeks So April 1st is Census Day. I have always been saying that stuff ought to be done by tax time. Will there be census forms in the post offices, as has been in the past? Speculation says yes.
Merely thinking that if somebody's dropping off their taxes at 11:59, it might be a good time to hit them and ask them, so how many dependents did you declare this year?
Right.
Right. Secondary question is, does the Census Bureau issue any sort of talking points for different populations? That is to say, if someone were to go to Penn College or Lycoming College to try to reach out to students and get them to fill out their forms, are there talking points specific to college students?
No.
Because it seems like that might be a wise
Should
step.
be, right. And as I said, I foresee in my tenure here so far, I see different avenues, different needs, and how to address those different needs. And again, Derek and I share the education background. We tackle things like, here's a need to accomplish. Right? So in my background in social studies for 25 years, having done economics and government and history and sociology, psychology, I differentiate all those avenues. And each county is different to me, but yet I understand the vested interest. So I'm not here saying one county is better than the other. I understand the scope, the holistic nature of this. It is important to all, no matter where we reside.
Right.
So yeah, I understand what you're saying. Are there talking points for specific lanes? No. Will I develop a specific pathway for Penn College, Lycoming College, and Mansfield? Because that's also in my zone? Yes. Each one is independent, each one's unique, because that's how you get the best results.
Okay. Mr. Nichols.
Thank you for your presentation. I can't stress how important the census is. I mean, they're all important, but what's been happening to our population has been declining, and I think we are missing a lot of counts. I think we haven't been proactive to certain groups, whether it be the colleges, excuse me, or other facilities that, have a lot of residents. We're in what's considered an urbanized area, and that's defined having a population of 50,000 or more. And it's based on a definition by the census of population and population density. So our urbanized area consists of the city of Williamsport, Old Lycoming Township, portions of Loyalsock, Du Bois Town, and South Williamsport. The last census, our population in the urbanized area was about 55,000, and I've seen that drop every 10 years. And now we're getting very close to that 50,000 threshold. What does that mean? We're no longer an urbanized area. We no longer receive federal funds directly. Somehow, the last census, the Bloomsburg-Berwick area is able to increase their population and become an urbanized area, and they benefited greatly. So if we drop below that 50,000 level, we lose all the money we get directly from the federal government. It goes to every other urbanized area. So I can't stress, I don't think we've been doing a good enough job in terms of being proactive and working with the Census Bureau and individuals that are responsible for the count to ensure that the colleges are participating, the leadership in these different organizations know how important it is. But we're at a point where this census that is coming up, if we drop below that 50,000, a lot of the things, the community development, transportation, grants, what have you, we're no longer a direct recipient. It's the state that's now in control. So I'm very concerned because I don't think we've been doing a good enough job. And I can't stress, and I appreciate and thank you for your presentation, because we're close to that number of 50,000, and that's a real important landmark. Thank you.
Let me echo that in a moment, because as you mentioned, Old Lycoming Township, earlier in the summer I talked with their supervisors. They made a very simple statement that they have dropped from a Class A to a Class 2, Class 1 to Class 2 township, again, because of the count in 2010. Net result is they lost a little bit of money. Right. And again, the underscoring thing is this is going to affect the city for the next decade, 2030.
Campana.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's nice talking to you. Mr. Berger, I just want to say publicly, thank you for your reaching out to my office. It's been a pleasure speaking to you several times. You seem like a very strong leader, someone that's concerned about figures. As a fellow teacher, I appreciate your hard work, and I feel very optimistic about this because this is the first time during my tenure that we've actually had somebody approach us like you have done in a proactive manner. And I believe with getting the news out and everybody, this has to be a collective engagement to count everybody, because the chief and I and former chiefs have been saying this for years. There's more people living in this city that has been counted. And we have to make sure everybody's counted. So everybody has to be on the same page. It affects city residents, especially financially. And let's get it done. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Berger.
Thank you, sir.
Certainly appreciate it.
Look forward to being back.
We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
We will move to item 6, ordinance creating an ethics commission in final reading. Mr. Lubin, short form, please.
An ordinance creating an ethics commission of the city of Williamsport and authorizing said ethics commission to develop a recommended code of ethics for the city of Williamsport.
Thank you, Mr. Lubin. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Motion and a second. Further comments tonight from council? Mr. Henderson.
Thank you. I might just say, and we've discussed this at length somewhat last time, but I just wanted to say, if this is approved today, then council, both council and the mayor will have 60 days to appoint our appointees to this commission. The first 2 appointments by council will only be 1-year term. Then the mayor will make his appointments, his first 2 appointments will be a 2-year term, and then council will also make 1 more appointment, which will be a 3-year term. Then after that, all the terms will be 3 years after that. So that just gets us started in that way. So that in the next year, there will already be new appointments to this commission a year out from here. So I just wanted to make mention of that, and that as the ordinance states here, we'll have 60 days to make those first appointments to this commission, who will not be employed by the city or appointed to any other board or commission, and they will be residents of the city as well. Just wanted to clarify those few points. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Other comments or questions from council tonight? Hearing none. Mr. Lubin, on the motion, please.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Lubin. Motion passes. And the clock's ticking. Item 7, ordinance adopting a 6-year capital budget, capital projects budget. Mr. Lubin, please.
Adopting a 6-year capital projects budget for the city of Williamsport for fiscal years ending June 30, 2020 to June 30, 2025. The total amount of the capital budgets is $96,803,000.
Thank you, Mr. Lubin. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Motion and a second. Thank you. Mr. Nichols.
Good
welcome.
evening. Good evening, President Allison, Vice President Mealy, members of council. This ordinance in front of you is to adopt the proposed six-year capital program for the city of Williamsport. As noted in the past, this document serves as a planning tool for the city. With the first 2 years, we try to structure as more of an action plan. This is one of 3 steps in terms of consideration of a city capital project. The second step is to budget that as part of the annual city budget and on a calendar year basis. And then the third step is actually to award the project after funds are secured. And also note in the administrative code, it is a living document which is subject to revisions each year by the administration and council. Also serves a federal regulatory requirement through the Watts planning process, transportation process in terms of a companion document. That brings us to the ordinance before you in the capital program and your report. There are 4 sections. The first section is a status report, gives you a update on the current projects and whether they've been completed, are in progress, or have been rescheduled. The second section is the actual proposed 6-year capital program. The next section gives you more detail on potential funding sources. And finally, the last section provides you with a narrative that each of the departments provided when they submitted their 6-year capital program to give you more of a narrative for description and justification. Next Monday, the Planning Commission will review the program and provide a recommendation to council. If necessary, the Finance Committee will also review this again before the next council meeting to provide the opportunity to address any comments by the Planning Commission. The total 6-year capital program is approximately $97 million. However, again, the first 2 years of the program or project the city is prioritizing for possible funding and implementation. So I'd just like to take you through the highlights on Section 2, the actual programs, a program budget, and highlight the first 2 years. Again, starting on page 1 of Section 2. So if you look at page 1, for public services, you'll see a paving program the first 2 years, which is budgeted about $1,580,000. And the continuation of the Brick Street Rehabilitation Project. There's also continuation of curb ramps, lights on initiative, streetscape, and the street tree project. There's $250,000 being budgeted for work associated with storm sewers, pump stations, and drainage structures in the first year, but we're not budgeting anything for the out years because that really calls into question the status of the Stormwater Authority, which really needs to be addressed next year, and some finality to, what direction everybody is taking to that end. There's $130,000 budget for each year for the Chesapeake Bay Pollution Reduction Plan was approved by council. As you know, that's in partnership with Loyalsock Township. There are 2 major infrastructure projects listed under public services, which are programmed the first 2 years. One, $4,345,000 budget for improvements to Graphis Run based on the R2 study, but that's a study that's never been presented formally, but they called for an improvement of that magnitude, and whether that's realistic, that's another discussion. There's also $11,500,000 being programmed for potential levee improvements, and that really includes all 6 years. And, that's based on a strategy that's in progress right now in terms of a staged approach, starting with relief wells and cross pipes and the SWIFT plan and everything else. So we just want to recognize it is a long-term funding issue. $807,000 is budgeted for public services, equipment, and facility roof projects as shown on page 2, primarily funded through liquid fuels. Also on page 2, there's a budget of $1,947,500 the first 2 years to upgrade city facilities related to recreation, specifically $675,000 for the second part of the Bowman Field project, which is ongoing, $280,000 for the Brandon Park band shell, and we were successful or thankful for the foundation to participate in that proposed project. $367,000 for Memorial Park improvements. I think we know what that's being considered for. And then $500,000 for a possible Lowe's Park and/or a Young's Wood project. At the bottom of page 2, the proposed Public Safety Department budget for the first 2 years provides for the purchase of 6 police cars and 1 truck. The first year would be 3 police cars, 1 truck, and the chief can go into more detail about that, or you can look at the narrative. And that's in the amount of $387,000 and a budget of $400,000 shown for the purchase of portable radios over 4 years. A major project like that would have to probably go through some sort of a multiple-year financing, lease purchase type financing initiative. Then year 2, a new public safety building is budgeted for $15 million, which we feel is a vision that needs vetted in today's time and what's going on in terms of, a regional approach that needs to be considered and meeting the needs of the city and other stakeholders, stakeholders such as UPMC and the county, and, it was considered several years ago and then it was not pursued, but I think there is a groundswell of interest and support for initiatives such as that, so that's a placeholder in year 2. Moving on to the codes department, Joe Girardi once again is out of control with his budget. He's budgeting $35,000 for vehicles and equipment in year 2. The fire department capital projects budget includes $565,000 for a new pumper in year 2 now, so that's been moving up every year, getting close to being a reality and pursuing funding. And then there's also budgets for facility improvements, support vehicles, typical projects, breathing apparatus, computer software, and money budget for upgrade of fire hydrants and laterals if and when needed. Also under general government funding for support equipment, MIS upgrades, network, and control systems for Mr. Cooley, who is at the other end of the room. And City Hall renovations are programmed the first 2 years, as well as the last 4 years to address needed improvements. If we're going to make a decision to stay in this building, that's what, some sort of a financing plan would look like. And then also budget $1 million is budget for if there's a decision to move City Hall is made in terms of relocation expenses, acquisition, and that figure of relocation is based on what happened when the school district moved as part of the William Street redevelopment project. Under transportation, River Valley Transit, again, is programming money for CNG buses. This would be, the entire conversion of our fleet to CNG. Then we're also programming $2.5 million for garage and CNG improvements to address our expanded services and fleet size. There's also budgets for support vehicles and spare components and support equipment, anything that we can capitalize to offset our operating budget. Again, we're programmed $2 million for connectivity over the Trade and Transit Center complex and 3rd Street Garage. If there's innovative financing or grants that would make that possible. And then the continuation of the East 3rd Street revitalization corridor, not only what's been awarded so far based in Franklin, which is really moving along and will be completed hopefully by the end of October, but also next year for 3rd Street, but we also have grants for Willow Street, more connectivity to the Riverwalk, East 4th Street streetscape and improvements. So there's a lot of pieces yet that we need to go out to bid and make that a complete project. So the budget for the first 2 years of the transportation is about $18 million. Of course, funding sources such as federal, again, those federal funds would not be there if we were non-urbanized area. So that's why I continue to say that the census is so critical, and we got to go out and make sure everybody's counted. And state grant sources and local funding sources, which are numerous for the East 3rd Street project. I'll end with the department heads are here tonight to answer any questions, and we're asking your approval on the first reading. Next couple of months, administration will be prioritizing these projects, which are determined to be essential and affordable in the next city budget, and so I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Council, questions on what we've heard so far? Ms. Mealy?
Well, we reviewed it.
Huh? Oh, I'm sorry, you did
As well.
review it in finance.
I'm sorry, I went to finance. I'm sorry.
I just completely forget about finance. It was reviewed in
Lucky
finance
dog.
committee.
This was reviewed by finance, and actually I spent the whole time you were talking, Mr. Nichols, trying to remember exactly what the discussion centered on, because it was sort of wide-ranging. We did forward it to the full body of council with a positive recommendation, and we got a little bit into the nitty-gritty, discussion of Stormwater Authority and what that looked like in terms of budgeting for next year versus budgeting long-term for stormwater management. And our hopes that, that whether we wind up moving forward with the Stormwater Authority, with the Water and Sewer Authority, or with, you know, another entity, we get that squared away in time to effectively manage our MS4 permitting for the next 5 years. And we had a bit of discussion as well about the Memorial Park improvements for next year, and I believe the total budget now at this point includes some Act 13 funds as well, which would be great if we could bring those to bear to make sure we really do a good job in the park. The public safety building, just so that, I believe Mr. Nichols already acknowledged this, but just so that no one gets their hopes up, budgeting that in year 2, I think, was to indicate that we are seriously interested in the project, not to indicate that we're likely to be moving on it by 2021. And anything of that magnitude is probably a 10-year project by the time we get the funding around. But if we intend to move on a public safety building that helps us to regionalize some safety services with the county and the city, we need to begin discussions about that ASAP, otherwise it simply will never happen. So I believe the chief and Mr. Nichols choosing to place that in the 2020-2021 budget year was simply to encourage us to take that as a serious priority instead of a distant possibility. And you'll excuse me, I realized I'm not projecting. The only other items I think we addressed were the sort of the play out of the 3rd Street revitalization corridor and just sort of what we're doing there and how the money's working out. The fact that it is nice to see something on this budget that actually is happening, and that has been the case for the last several years. We are fortunate there. And I will turn to Mrs. Katz to remind me of anything I've forgotten.
What we discussed is, as we can see, a lot of the projects that are in here for the capital budget are really dependent on what our funding is going to be in the next few years, and we can't emphasize that enough. The chief went through with the public safety building as far as what his priorities are with the, he needs his firearms and the portable radios, which we're hoping that we can get some funding for that, but again, here we go. Census is going to be dependent on what we get funding in the future. But these are priorities there are priorities that have been set with the departments of what they need. As we see, pumper trucks coming up, that's a priority. There are so many things in the police department, that's a priority. The one that has not really gone overboard is codes, which, as you said, he really went overboard here. Memorial Park improvements, we've discussed how many times, and we're keeping our fingers crossed because we are going after funding for that, and hopefully the funding is coming through on that because we are looking forward to all of our parks being accessible. Memorial Park was the one that was the only park in the city that was accessible, and taking that down, we have nothing at this point, and we're hoping that the funding does come through. And my goal has always been to make sure all of our parks are accessible to the kids throughout the city. So other than that, I think that's what we've covered on mostly everything. The chief gave a really great description of all of his needs. So we have to move forward and see what we can do with all this at this point.
Thank you. Finance Committee.
It was interesting. The capital budget is always interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's, the first 2 years, if it's approved, essentially what I think everybody is saying, they agree that those are priority projects, and if the funding's not in place, to try to pursue them or develop a planning strategy to pursue, the viability of a project, and just sort of says that we're all on the same page when it relates to certain capital projects.
The only other thing that I would add then to that is that part of our discussion, especially with the Bearcat tactical vehicle and the police radios within the police department, was that we need to be looking for, we know that we will eventually be looking for public safety grants for a public safety building, and that, of course, is important. But in the meantime, smaller grants that will help make something like a Bearcat or a new radio system more affordable for the taxpayers are key. And so the chief, of course, completely understood that point. And, but I do think when we see big numbers like that, especially in the early years of the budget, it can make people nervous. So it's important to note that we're looking for funding to make that a possibility without it necessarily coming out of taxpayers' pockets. And, well, our taxpayers' pockets.
Yeah.
And other than that, we passed it to the full body of council with a positive recommendation.
Thank you.
True. You know, the first year that I was on council and this came to me, I did not know a lot of this was a wish list
Yeah.
of what we were going to go through.
It's a little
And-
overwhelming,
And I
right?
really started
Yeah.
freaking out. It's like, where are we going to get the money for all this? And then we find out, you know, this is our objectives for the future and to learn how to go after it. And that's the objective, is to go after it.
It gives us a goal for the future, which is always good. Other questions? Mr. Henderson?
Not so much a question, because I think I understand this fairly well, but just a statement, I suppose, and that is that this is obviously 6 years out, and we're all talking about funding, and we're grasping and looking and planning and all of that. I would note the plan indicates bank financing of $2.2 million. And that's a lot of borrowing. And obviously, that's because we just don't know where right now. But I would note that since it's there, I think it'd be better for us to plan not to borrow than to plan to borrow. And so maybe we could write in there possible grants. I mean, this is obviously, it's a wish list. Well, I think our wish ought to be not to borrow. And just pointing that out. And
Well,
I
borrowing
understand.
bank financing, though, if you look at, we've done that many times when we have projects such as radios or ammunition or whatever, where it's a $400,000 or $500,000 project. So, you know, we did that short-term financing, the budget over a period of 4 or 5 years. So I think it's more specific to something like that, where it's a lease purchase type program. But I mean, you're right. You know,
Yeah,
it certainly is not a definite.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just a possible, maybe a way that we've typically done in the past. I don't know which one you're looking at, but that's,
Yeah. Well, I'm
you
just
know, it can be
looking-
undetermined, it can be, you know, it's just sort of a planning guide, I guess.
Yeah. No, I'm just looking at the very first page, which is the possible funding plan, you know, the summary there. And,
No, I see, yeah.
you know, right under Act 13, you got bank financing. So, you know, those things stand out to me. If we're planning, my thought is let's plan not to borrow.
We could add it to the undetermined 35
There
million.
you go. You know, and like I said.
Or we
not
could
that it-
switch the numbers, I don't know.
Right, because this is a wish list, it's almost like it doesn't matter, right? But as a matter of principle, I think it
That's,
does.
yeah.
So, just a thought. Thank you.
Good point. Thank you. Other comments or questions? Ms. Mealy?
First, to follow up on Mr. Henderson's comment, we did discuss that briefly at Finance, that I think this council in particular has proven slightly allergic to borrowing, much to Mr. Nichols' chagrin. And I'm not saying that you like it, Mr. Nichols, merely that you see it as more expedient than we do. Actually, the one other thing that I was just looking back in some text messages I had exchanged with Randy, and we had a couple of days ago discussed that perhaps we should attempt to work into the capital budget when we're talking about upgrading computers around City Hall, going digital for City Council as well.
I think that'd be awesome.
And so I don't know if that's something that we could think about trying to incorporate even before next time's reading. I do feel like it's something that would benefit, that in the long run would yield quite a bit of savings to City Hall in terms of paper and et cetera, et cetera. Not to mention that I think then Right to Know would just go through the roof here, how much stuff is retrievable. But if it were possible to work up those numbers, or if perhaps, Mr. Cooley, they were built in and I'm unaware of that. Okay, got it. It's something that another thing that I think is somewhat important moving forward in the next 6 years.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just a note on Councilman Henderson's comment about because the next council may be bringing forth that line of credit we need for RACP and our reimbursable grants, so that is not that $2 million, so, you know, I don't want you to jump out your seat.
All right.
That's planning ahead, that's. Other comments? Questions on the capital budget? Hearing none. Mr. Lubin, please, on first reading.
Mr. Ariello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes,
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Lubin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. And motion passes first reading. Item 8, ordinance vacation of a portion of Franklin Street. Mr. Lubin, please.
Vacating a portion of Franklin Street in the 8th Ward for the Lycoming College Multipurpose Building Campus Gateway.
Thank you, Mr. Lubin. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second. Motion and a second. Mr. Benner, welcome tonight.
Good evening. What you have before you is an ordinance vacating a portion of Franklin Street. And if you need a more thorough description of the exact portion, the attached plan will point that out. This vacation is necessary for the realignment of Franklin Street, which will serve as a grand entrance to the new Lycoming College multi-purpose building. The new configuration of Franklin Street will greatly improve and enhance the driving experience of those people who may choose to enter the college at this location. This ordinance was reviewed by Public Works earlier this week.
Thank you, Mr. Benner.
Sure.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes, it did come to Public Works, and it was passed with a positive recommendation. This is a necessary component to what's going on in East Third Street project. As everybody knows, the streets are being torn up in that area, and it's for the purpose of also part of the realignment of the street. This is the first reading. This will come after the second reading, then we will have 28 days afterwards before this can go into effect. Like I said, this was passed with a positive recommendation to the full body of council.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Katz. Questions then from council? Mr. Henderson.
Just a note, it's the second reading that will occur 28 days after this one. And that would be because if the city should vote to vacate, then there is a time for the public to be notified. That way, if anyone should lay claim to that land, they actually have the ability to do that. So that's the purpose for that 28-day waiting period. I had a question. Is there any reason that we should delay on this until we have a deed of dedication to come at the same time from the college?
That question would be better served by Mr. Lubin. As far as the timing of that, I do have in my possession, not right now, but back in the office, the deed of dedication. It's being filed right now or recorded with the county. We need to go through that process. I sent that to Austin White to look at, and it will be recorded, and then information taken from that entered it into my ordinance. So the timing, Mr. Lubin could better answer that.
Generally, it's tied into the second reading.
Okay.
If for some reason there's an objection from somebody else who claims an ownership in that area, it would give us some time to look at it, as opposed to recording and then suddenly doing corrective deeds.
Right.
But it would all be recorded at the same time when the ordinance becomes effective.
Okay.
Generally, they're tied together.
Okay.
Mr. Nichols is laying claim.
No, I just want to comment that is, and we asked Mr. Benner to put that on because I found out the RACP grant, which the coming college has for their project, because it's a RACP grant, there's a lot of list of special conditions, and I was told that one of the special conditions is land control. So to expedite the reimbursement for that project to the college, we would ask your consideration to okay that tonight. And that's the reason why. It's one of those administrative things that the RACP grant requires.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Other comments? Mr. Henderson?
Just one more question. Is there a reason why this process didn't start earlier? I mean, if you drive by there, you can see there's no street there anymore, you know? I mean, it's already gone. I'm wondering, is there a reason why it didn't come
It was,
earlier?
in attending the meetings at the college, they wanted it to start earlier, and months ago, I did attempt to start this process. I had it written, and different people wanted me to hold off on it, we'll put it that way. So the timing of it wasn't completely up to me,
Okay.
yes.
Just wondered on that because, you know, the project is moving along and it almost seems with or
Right.
without us. But it ought to be the other way around. You know, it ought to be with our approval ahead of time. Of course, this is a big, very involved project, and I totally understand that, and there's lots of moving parts. But this is fairly significant of a moving part. So just wanted to mention that.
One issue is, once the street is vacated, and the city's control over any of the utility lines ends, we cannot make a vacation conditioned upon continuation of the utility lines that are in the street. That has to be a separate agreement between the college and the utilities.
Okay.
At one time, we were permitted to do that. Supreme Court ruled that we were not permitted to retain any interest in a street once it's vacated. That's one area that we have to, it does slow street vacations down.
Okay.
It's not just the Lycoming College one, it's been other streets too.
All right. Well, and that makes sense. I mean, we've got to work out those details there before we lose interest altogether in that area. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Any other comments? Hearing none. Mr. Lubin on the motion, please.
Mr. Oviallo?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Motion passes on first reading. Thank you, Mr. Lubin. Item 9 then, ordinance vacation of portion of DuBois Street. This is to remove this from the table.
Vacation of a portion of DuBois Street. We'll need a motion first to remove it from the table.
Is there a motion?
Second.
Motion and a second to remove from the table.
Oviallo?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy? Mr. Allison?
Yes. So it's back on the table, the ordinance, vacation ordinance. We can discuss. Mr. Benner, do you have anything more to add on this?
Not since the last reading. I mean, if you want me to read it again, I will.
I don't,
Nothing's really changed, other than the fact that you've all received a copy of the positive legal opinion
right.
on the
yeah.
matter.
That was the
And
main
Miss-
issue before, correct?
Mr. Carey is in attendance, and he's willing to answer all other questions surrounding the other issue,
Okay.
if you want to.
Mr. Carey, would you mind coming up to the front bench in case there are questions? You'll be right there. This was reviewed again in Public Works, so Mrs. Katz.
Yes, this has been a long process, and we've tried to cover all of our bases with this process. We did have the public hearing, and Mr. Carey was present there. Mr. Carey is also taking care of all the permits that go along with this, and also the advertising that goes along with this process. You own the property, to clarify this for people, you own the property on either side of the brick street.
That's correct.
And to vacate this, the reason why you are asking for this street to be vacated is in order for you to fulfill your project that you want to do with your building there, to enhance the building. And because of the configuration of that street, it's very difficult for you to do anything with the building, especially since you own the property on both sides. And one of the questions that came up, and I know this came up with at Public Works, that usually there is a plan in place first before we allow something like this to happen. But as you have come to us several times at this point with stating that it's difficult for you to go through the process of trying to expand your business there to get anybody else to buy that property or to enhance that property or to bring businesses into that property has been very difficult because of the street itself. And I think anybody that goes down Hepburn Street can actually see that the configuration of that is very difficult to get out to on Hepburn and then get into Little League. I mean, it is very difficult. And there are a lot of people that are using that street to avoid Little League Boulevard. We can understand that. And it's just a crazy way that street is set up. But we've gone through this. We did pass this on with a positive recommendation. I think we've tried to ask as many of the right questions as possible. It's gone through the city solicitors, so it was passed with a positive recommendation.
Any other comments?
I guess I would just say that this was quite the process, and it's not typical for us to want to vacate a street just because somebody asks. In this case, Mr. Carey owns the property on either side, and we did check with our police chief and our fire chief, and correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, but you both indicated that this would not be a problem with meeting the public safety needs of the city if we were to close this alley, this portion. Okay. And the property owners, or the tenants rather, around were all as well contacted, and they seem to be in agreement with this as well. Is that correct, Mr. Carey?
Yes.
Okay. And so because of that, because it didn't seem to be a problem with our public safety, and it would add great potential to our to economic development, and because Mr. Carey owns both sides of the property, it seemed adequate justification to me to pass this on. Thank you.
Other comments? Ms. Mealy?
Just a quick question related to the setback from Little League Boulevard. To what extent, most properties on that side of Little League Boulevard are set back a good ways from Little League, but Mr. Carey, you own directly up to the sidewalk there, correct?
Yes, there
And
was
there's no
an old
easement?
railroad right-of-way there that was purchased from the city, I believe, in '94 by my father.
Got it. So, and I guess this is partly a question for Mr. Benner. There is no reason, and you'll excuse me, Mr. Carey, the billboards there, is that on your property? or
There's
is-
4 billboards on that. It's actually, those properties there are really divided up, but there are billboards on a section of property that we own there, yes, 4 of them.
Okay, so you own also, do you own the laundry business there? Do you own the property? Sorry, I'm just trying
The
okay.
triangle over to Pine Street.
Got it, okay. But at this point, we're only vacating through to Laurel, so,
Only between Hepburn Street and Laurel.
right, and
correct.
Laurel, which is might be a total length of somewhere between 50 and 100 feet from the looks of things, yeah, maybe a little more.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Got it. And then the intention is, and there's no reason, Mr. Benner, that Mr. Carey couldn't utilize the property all the way basically out to the sidewalk. there
No,
with Little League
no, that
Boulevard.
wouldn't be an
Correct,
issue.
there's no sort of easement the city has on any stretch of that,
Right,
correct?
that is correct.
Okay. All right, just trying to arrive at a better understanding. It is, well, I'm always a little bummed when we lose a brick street, but on the other hand, I can understand that that triangle is basically unusable unless there's a, some sort of ability to cross that easement. So that was all. Thank you.
Adam Winters doesn't want to take any more of the bricks either, I want to tell you that.
Hey, wait, I might have a use for him if we're just getting rid of him.
He's running out of space.
I don't think there are any other questions. Mr. Carey, could you just give your name and address for our records for when our clerk writes the minutes? Your name and address, so it's not, so it's recorded for her to write.
Jeff Carey, I'm owner of River City Land Company at 616 Hepburn Street.
Thank you. Hearing no other comments or questions, Mr. Lubin on the motion,
Joe
please.
Violo?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes,
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Lubin, and ordinance passes on first reading.
Thank
Or
you.
no, yes, because we tabled it, so that was our first official reading. Item 10, then, an ordinance amending the city map to remove DuBois Street from protected Brick Street. Mr. Lubin, please.
Ordinance amending Article 902 of the city's codified ordinances relating to brick paved streets and removing certain streets from those to be preserved under the ordinance.
Is there a motion?
so move.
Second.
Motion and second. Mr. Benner, this is also, no, I guess that was
This-
tabled as well. I'm sorry.
This has been revised slightly, brought upon from Public Works. The recommendation was to add a couple items that were graciously included from our unofficial city historian, Bruce Hoffman. I'd like to thank him for that, and I verified his information. And at this time, I'll let you know what was added. In addition to this section of DuBois Street from Hebron to Laurel Street being taken off this list, Nice Street in between West Edwin and West 4th Street is still present on the list in error. So we'd like to have that removed from the codified ordinances. That's actually has been vacated. That has been vacated, and I can't remember the ordinance number, but I can produce that for you. There's no longer a street there. The other issue is Court Street between 6th Street and a point 50 feet south of the southern right-of-way line of DuBois Street. It is noted, it is described as it is right now as 5th Street, and that's incorrect. So that change, that one word change is all that's necessary to the code. Change 5th Street to 6th Street. And all the rest is the same.
Okay. This is different than the original ordinance then, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll need to amend because we took that one off the table. Can we do all the changes?
You can do all the amendments as one.
Okay. Pardon me?
Could be a vote to take.
We did, we voted.
On this one, too, this one.
Yes. I asked for a motion in a second. We did get a motion in a second on that, right? Yeah. Okay.
Wait, point of order, point of order. I don't think we took it off the table, but that was a motion and a second for this new
Yeah.
ordinance, is that correct? So it needs no amendment, is that correct?
The only
Well,
thing before city,
We took the old one off the table.
no, there was never a vote to take the old one off the table. But this one is different than what had been tabled.
Okay, but
And there's been a
This
motion and
one-
a second to approve this one that's currently before you.
so
This one-
that
this one is not
the
on the
original
agenda.
ordinance never gets moved from the table. and
Okay, but that's the
reconsidered.
one that's on our agenda, if you read the agenda.
I would defer to Mr. Lubin on that.
You can just vote to remove the other one from the table and then do an amending vote.
That sounds easiest.
That'd be the easiest way.
Remove the other one from the table.
Table and then amend the prior one to conform to this amendment.
Okay. Is there a motion to remove the original ordinance from the
So
table?
moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Mr. Lubin on the motion to remove from the table.
Yellow?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lubin. Motion passes. It's off the table. Now we can entertain a motion to amend what we just removed
So
from the table.
moved.
Motion.
Second?
Motion and second to make these amendments. Any discussion on the amendments? No.
Yes.
Yes.
Ms. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lubin. So the amendments are approved, and now we can vote on the amended ordinance. Is there a motion to vote on the amended ordinance?
So moved.
Second?
Motion and second. Thank you. Mr. Lubin?
Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. I think we're done. Thank you, Mr. Lubin. And
All right.
that's the first reading of our new amended ordinance that does some cleanup that we need to be done as well. So thank you for putting that on there as well, Mr. Venner.
Thank you.
Item 11, resolution authorizing the establishment of fundraising for a new canine unit. Mr. Lubin, please.
A resolution to authorize the establishment of fundraising for a new Williamsport Bureau of Police K-9 unit.
Thank you, Mr. Lubin. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Motion and a second. Chief Hagan, welcome tonight.
Good evening, members of council and citizens of Williamsport. It is my pleasure to be here tonight to talk about our efforts over the past several months to revive and reestablish our canine program here in Williamsport. As you know, we once had a flourishing canine unit many years ago of at least 4 dogs, and since I've been here in the last 20 years, we've had as many as 3 at one time. Present in the room, gentlemen, if you would like to come up, Timothy Karshnak, who is going to be our primary trainer, retired Lieutenant Dave Bailey. He's volunteering to both solicit funding and also assist us in the beginning of our program here. And Mr. Peter DeBartolomeo, former local business owner of Bart's Pizza, and he's now a constable in our area. All of these gentlemen have already assisted and continue to assist us with our program. It started earlier this year. In late January, Councilwoman Katz approached me. Mr. DeBartolomeo, a big supporter of our department, had approached her and wanted to know if we could start the program again. And it was exciting to even think of such a thing. And so we started having ad hoc meetings and talking. Many of you were at them. And it was an exciting time. So we started figuring out how to do it, and we found out about training facilities, one of which we visited, actually 2 in April. One of them we were most impressed with, called Shallow Creek, which is in Sharpsville, Pennsylvania, and you have some of the details in your packet there. Very impressive facility there, and so we decided that that would be the one we would send our canine officers to. As you know, we have a long history that goes far back, all the way back to the 1920s, on and off, where officers brought their own dogs or had other dogs, and it got more serious in the 70s. Mr. Bailey was a canine officer for 24 years of his career here. Mr. Karshnak, more than 20 in Susquehanna Township. They both trained together as young officers down in Swatara Township under a master trainer, Richard Pastuka, who is known nationally for his training skills. And so these guys got to know each other, along with our program administrator, who couldn't make it tonight, Lieutenant Brian Womer. He is ill and apologizes for not being able to be here. Those three gentlemen all trained together down in Swatara many years ago and developed a good working relationship, and everybody recommends Mr. Karshnak. Mr. Karshnak currently trains the only dog in Lycoming County, Chief Rod Smith's police service dog in Hughesville right now, and comes highly recommended from him. I have met with Mr. Karshnak. He is a very experienced canine officer. He is a world-level competitor and judge in Schutzen. He does many things. He lives and breathes dogs and is a very impressive individual. He and his wife Carol own the Muddy River Canine Company in the Harrisburg area, and we are going to be very safe with Mr. Karshnak overseeing our program. And like I said, I'm most impressed with that. It all comes down to the numbers, right? So what we're looking at is an effort that will be at least initially funded and hopefully funded completely by donations. And we believe that in the first year, the first team will cost us approximately $34,042. Just showing this list of things on the new attachment that was passed out to you by Ms. Frank today, Mr. Karshnak already started seeing ways he could save us more money. So it's nice to have an expert around for that and for many other reasons. The first team would be a dual-purpose narcotics dog. The second team, the same, another dual-purpose narcotics dog. Our plan is to specially assign these service dogs on our evening shift and our morning watch, so that would be from 4 to 12 p.m., and then from 12 p.m. to 8 a.m. in the morning, where we would need them the most. And also, we would need them for all of the reasons that are in the packet that talk about all the abilities for a dual-purpose dog. And then finally, the third team, if we get there, and we believe we will pretty quickly, an explosives dog. Now, with regard to explosives, we're not just talking about a bomb dog. We call it a bomb dog, but these dogs, they hit on ingredients in explosives that are also common to ammunition and also firearms. So in shooting investigations, in other investigations that involve looking for those types of items, they'll be very useful. Bomb threats, certainly in our larger events like Little League. Mr. Bailey could tell you stories about having to search schools and having to search Little League facilities and all sorts of things. The courthouse, when we've had bomb threats and things like that. And it's very, very useful to have an explosive dog. And my initial plan would be to specially assign that PSD or police service dog to the daylight shift where it would be most useful. And so we would have them as special assignments, and that's the easiest way to do it. But just some of the initial people who have reached out to me and to others, Mr. DeBartolomeo and Mr. Bailey, the indications that we're getting is that we're going to have a groundswell of support very quickly, and we believe certainly the first one or two teams, the required funds, we're going to be able to reach pretty fast. So we're excited about it, and I welcome any questions for myself or the group.
Thank you, Chief Hagan. This was reviewed by Finance and public safety, so we'll start with public safety. Mr. Henderson?
Yes, we did talk about this. We've been talking about this for quite some time in public safety, and it is in the interest of the public safety of the city of Williamsport to have these dogs. And so we liked the fact that these costs initially and hopefully ongoingly will be supplied by donations. Also, the fact that there'll be a separate bank account ensuring that those funds are kept and reserved for that specific purpose, I think will be a great comfort to donors as well. But it's a lot of money and it's a lot of effort, but we believe that it is worth the money and worth the effort. We have wonderful men who have stepped up to the plate here to kind of lead the way and to ensure that this program is professional and effective. The documentation here is great. The research has been extensive. And so with the confidence that the finance department, the finance committee has also looked over the numbers and has addressed a few things and guiding in that way, the public safety committee voted to pass this on to the full body with a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Other comments? Mr. Novio?
Just a quick comment. I recall that the information we received from the chief also indicated that we have a little bit of remaining equipment from previous times.
Yes,
And
sir.
that in fact will save us at least a couple $1,000s right off the top. So a quick savings as we begin the whole process of initiating the funding. So
Yes, sir.
$2,000 is $2,000.
It is, and Mr. Karshnak looked at the list and started crossing stuff off right away. He has some of his own equipment as well, and certainly has a level of expertise that none of us have, so he's going to save us quite a bit of money. This was a list that we put together of everything that we would possibly need. It would appear that we don't need every single thing on here, and we'll be able to save a little bit more money once he becomes involved. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was also reviewed by Finance. Ms. Mealy?
This was indeed reviewed by Finance and forwarded to the full body of council with a positive recommendation. The majority of the conversation in Finance centered first off on really what a positive initiative this is and will be for the city, I think, both from a community outreach perspective as well as adding to the sort of abilities of our force, some four-legged abilities as well, I guess. But, that said, we did request a couple of things. We wanted, as you may have noticed from the additional language, we asked the chief and others involved with this resolution to give us an idea of exactly what the cost for each individual K-9 unit was going to be, and then we asked that we set some basic financial limits of saying we don't initiate purchase or training until we know we have the funding for a minimum of 1 year for the first dog, likewise for the second dog, likewise for the third dog, just to make certain we don't wind up in some sort of situation where here we have a dog, but we actually only have $17,000 of the total first year's cost. And so that was, I think, our, one might say, somewhat fiscally responsible recommendation. The only other observations that I would make, having thought about this further over the last couple of days, are two. One is that, well, we had some discussion at the meeting regarding whether or not South Williamsport might still have funding left over from their K-9 program.
I did contact Chief Finnerty from the South Williamsport Police. They made an agreement with Devin Thompson there to help or assist the dog after it retired. Those funds are depleted. However, they did make use of, or make a cage available to us that will save us a couple $1,000s. That's the savings that you see in the highlighted portion on page 1 of the attachment. So we're going to buy a cage for $200 that would have cost us much more. But the funding is either gone or nearly gone, and we will not be able to access it.
Okay, interesting. And then my second question, in thinking about it, is in terms of a time commitment from our officers, specifically the training officer and the officer who is caring for the dog and basically for whom the dog becomes a member of their family, what are we looking at in terms of the time?
One
commitment?
full day every 2 weeks, like the CERT team.
Got it.
And that is necessary, that's the standard. And then there are also other trainings that come up, just like with any other duty position, where we take full advantage to enhance the skill level. But a basic maintenance training of 1 day every 2 weeks. And we will coordinate that training with the chief of Hughesville during his time so that we can all train together. That enhances the training. I've also spoken to one of the county commissioners about the idea of eventually elevating our training to a regional law enforcement training center, and the idea of a canine training facility, a building with a fenced-in area where they could safely train during all times of the year, came up as something that would fit into that type of a facility if the county ever became interested in doing such a thing.
I think that's a terrific idea. And I think as much as we can regionalize services like this, because we know that we won't be the only entity probably in the multi-municipal area utilizing these dogs, even if they are Williamsport's dogs. And so to the extent that we can sort of share the provision of those services, that would be great. I guess my follow-up question based on the question about how much time it'll take out of any officer's schedule is, I'm wondering, and I'm asking this both of you and of the rest of council, if we would want to set some sort of staggered timeline for acquisition of canine teams predicated on the fact that we want them to mesh well into the department, and we need to figure out what our needs are time-wise within the department, as well as you just sort of see how they play out, see how much extra time they take, see whether or not our staffing capabilities are up to it before we're adding. If we, if for some reason, if we are successful and we fundraise what we're looking at close to $100,000 this year for dogs, and we add 3 dog teams, we're adding a huge amount of manpower needs that we aren't necessarily staffed to provide for at this point. So I'm wondering if we want to have a discussion real quick about how to stagger out, making sure that we don't overwhelm our manpower with canine acquisition, if we're fortunate enough to really be able to raise a bunch of funding quickly. I say that only because I know that we already feel as though we're relatively stretched to the max in the department, so I don't want us to overcommit too quickly. But I'm putting that out there so that other people can have some input. I know that public safety has had more discussions about this than finance certainly has. This is the first time I saw this agreement, so I'm definitely just putting it out there for everybody to have some input on.
I can start.
Okay.
All right. It's one of two things. If we don't have enough manpower on the days that these canine officers train, we have to be willing to do one of two things, either pay the overtime or we have to hire more people. Coincidentally, here in the next month or two, I'm going to ask you to let us hire more people. Now, you may or may not approve of that, but there are two different philosophies here, and I must tell you, the willingness of our younger officers to work overtime is not the same as those of us who came around many years ago. And so it's a different group they're very enthusiastic, but they're not as hungry for the overtime. So a department that was once 55 officers 20 years ago dwindled to 51, but the work really didn't go down much. And so we had 51 people doing the work of, I would argue, many more. I don't know how much it will affect shifts. It depends on when they bid their days off, and it is a part of the contract that they bid days. The actual canine training day could be moved to a day when we are heavy on manpower, and it doesn't affect our minimum, and it may not cause any overtime at all. But if on some particular shift or in some particular year it did, because it is a requirement that they train a certain amount, then we would have to either be willing to pay the overtime on occasion when it occurs, or we would have to talk more seriously about having just maybe 3 more officers so that there would be 1 more per shift and the minimum wouldn't drop as low on that day. Those are conversations we're obviously going to have in the near future during budget time, but that is my part on that.
I agree with Ms. Mealy. There's definitely, we have an idea what the budget's going to look like because we had a 3-year projection, and it's not a pretty picture for this year and the year beyond. And we wish we could fund every single thing, but the city taxpayers are stressed with real estate bills that are the highest in this area. So I think as with any new program, we need to, I guess that leads me to my initial question I had. I see the list of costs. How many of these are yearly recurring costs? Is that broken out anywhere?
No, there is a separate, in the larger packet, there's a separate figure of approximately $62.28 per year, which is the annual expense once the first year is done, and once the equipment for each public service dog or patrol service dog is purchased. You're looking at a little more than $6,000 per year to maintain each unit. A lot less than the initial year.
I knew it was. I see it at the bottom of.
I really don't anticipate much overtime, to be honest with you. These are patrol officers, and they count, when they work, they count towards manpower. When they leave, obviously, it's for a necessary event. We can do this, we can make the day, we can adjust it, work with Chief Smith to try to come up with a training day that, rids us of as much overtime as possible. And I'm not saying that this program is contingent on whether we hire more people. I'm just saying that that would be one way to alleviate potential overtime of any kind, not just that might be created. Once in a while, we see it because of CERT training. But in order to maintain a CERT team and all of its capabilities,
Right.
we need to train a certain amount. And this is the same thing for a unit like this. It has certain training needs, and there's no way to properly maintain it without that.
Right.
So.
And, I mean, obviously, public safety is a very high priority. So we'll be trying to do a balancing act on the budget and really focus on needs that are prioritized. And Mrs. Katz?
This program was near and dear to my heart. You know that I went after this. Chief, first of all, I have to compliment you on everything that you did. You crossed every T and dotted every I. I mean, you researched this program from one end to the other. And with the help of everybody behind you, it's been exciting to see this program go into this mode at this point. We're all excited to start getting this going. As we said in the beginning of the year, we wanted to make sure that there was a dog in the city probably by the end of the year. That was the goal. That was the goal to set for this. One of the things that we have to realize is having a dog is an ambassador of the city, number one. Number two, it's a tool to protect our officers. They are not going to walk into a situation first. Number three, it is going to help decrease crime. Because when people see dogs, they don't go do things that they normally would do. So I think in the long run, we're going to save money in so many different areas because of crime being lessened with a dog. I know that I've heard from the school districts, they missed the dogs going up to the school. They really did. It's just a fantastic tool to use, not only education-wise, but safety-wise. And one of our goals, and I think for everybody, is always stated, we want the best tools for our officers, for the safety of our officers, and this is one of them right here. And like I said, thank you very much for all the work you've done put into this. I've learned an awful lot about dogs. I've learned an awful lot about what it takes to care for and maintain the dog. But we also covered a lot of areas. We covered the insurance. We covered so many different things with this to make sure all the bases were covered. So I think the future, when we do get the first dog, it's going to be a learning process again. And I know for the mayor, you were concerned at one point because the last time we had a dog, there was no backup person to take care of the dog. The chief has guaranteed that we have a long backup here at this point of people, of officers that are really willing to go into this process. We didn't want to see that happen again because it does put a huge expense that was put out there, and then we're left with nothing. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that also. Okay, so I think we covered a lot, okay? But the first dog will be a learning process again.
And just to add to that, there are at least 27 of our 48 officers have less than 7 years on the job. At least 5 of them are seriously interested in these 3 slots right now. So we're going to have people interested in this for a long time. I don't anticipate that it will ever stop, really. If we get it going right and take care of these teams and train them right, I think they're going to last for good. The argument for so long was we could have an officer shot or we could have an officer attacked. And the most recent example for so long was Officer Maloney in 1907. Well, now it's Officer Carita in 2017. And the presence of these dogs with all the armed individuals that we have come in contact with, I myself have come in contact with numerous armed people in my career here. The presence of that animal could very well be the difference between that gun coming out of that waistband or not, and an officer getting shot or not, or a citizen for that matter. I was just talking to Mr. Karsnack, who, like I said, trains Rod Smith's dog, and one of the things that he does is he also follows up and makes sure that the canine officers and their administrators are going out and interviewing citizens about the impact of the program in the community. And when he had Rod Smith do that, he told me just an hour ago, a couple of hours ago now, he told me that criminals in the area, they saw a drop in some crimes. And when they interviewed criminals about why they weren't coming in the city anymore, it was because of the dog. Some of them actually said that. So it's difficult to measure, obviously, but it does have a suppressing effect on crime as well. Public relations is an obvious thing, but these dogs track, they trail, they search areas, they search buildings, they keep people from getting hurt and killed. And they're just an amazing tool, you're right.
Mr. Henderson.
I don't know that I could add a whole lot more to the need that we've heard and just the incredible value of such a tool for our force. But I would agree with Ms. Mealy. There's going to be a cost. There's going to be a cost, and the hours, the manpower hours, it's something we have to take into consideration, and I think all involved need to be aware of that. But I think this marks perhaps a kind of a defining moment of the direction that we want to go in some extent. And I really think it's a good move. It's a good direction. And as difficult as it may be to find that funding or whatever is necessary, I really believe it's in the interest of our citizens to go through that extensive work to find it. There may be other things that we might have to set to the side and say, well, we can't pursue this other dream, but this one, for the sake of the safety of our citizens, we will pursue. And that's my take on that. It's always a balancing act. There's always the evaluation of one project over another, and there must be the priorities. And so I think to some extent we set a priority here by moving ahead with this. And as Mrs. Katz stated, it will be a learning process. You know, just because we say, yes, you can go raise some funds, doesn't mean we're going to have 3 dogs this year, and it's going to upset the whole department. So we'll grow our way into it, and I'm sure we'll be making adjustments as we go.
Thank you. Ms. Mealy?
Mrs. Katz, do you have something else to add to that point before? Okay, sorry. Norm, can I ask a question? If I think partly what I'm indicating, and I'm hearing a bit from the rest of council, that we want to understand what the real budgetary impacts of this are. As much as we're in favor of the program, we also want to understand piece by piece what it's costing us and what our obligations are there. And we know a lot of that because Chief Hagan really has done his homework. What I'm curious to do is request as part of this resolution a report to council on the progress of fundraising, and perhaps, but I don't know if I can put this into the resolution. I would like it to come before us when we authorize the purchase of the first dog and the second. That's not an item that would have to come before us as a rule, because those expenditures are underneath the 19.4 threshold.
Well, they'd be underneath, obviously, the $20,000 threshold, but in another couple of months, you're going to be voting on next year's budget. And I would trust to be a line item for the police dog, which would give you your control right then and there.
Okay.
The other is you can add, in the last of the wherefore clauses, another one that the chief will report to council by, and then just pick a date, you know, on the status of the fundraising.
Got it. I think that's just, because it's going to be a new program again, and specifically because we're hoping to use fundraise dollars for the entire expenditure for the animals, not necessarily for the staff time, but for the animals. Then I am somewhat anxious that we keep a bit of an eye on this for a while, just not an eye on either the fundraising efforts or an eye on the department, but I simply want to understand how it unfolds. Because I think that will help us understand what it needs to look like in the budget moving forward. And I think in the long run, that will help us have fewer debates about the program moving forward if we're kept abreast of what's going on as it's going on for a while. So it's not, I apologize, that was the wrong terminology. I'm not trying to keep an eye on how somebody's doing their job, but I am saying that I think if we're kept apprised initially, there's going to be less fighting about it in future. And we all like to avoid fighting.
The other alternative would be just to, you know, for a future agenda item, just list a report from the chief.
Right, okay. That's, so.
Without having to amend the ordinance, you can just, as an agenda item, put down that the chief will give a report on the status.
I think what I would ask is that perhaps we put in here that, we know that the council will have to authorize the initial contracts for, not so much for purchase, but for training, and the ongoing contract with Mr. Karshnak for training as well. If I could add language, and Norm, I'll look to you for advice here, that says something along the lines of, council will receive fundraising reports either quarterly or upon reaching each of these milestones, whichever comes first, so to speak.
The easier might be just to have the added paragraph, number 4, that the chief will submit a report to city council on the status of the program, you know, and just pick a date. You know, use November 1st or November 15th or whatever.
What do you guys feel?
You know, the first meeting in December or whatever, however you want to do it.
I mean, I think we're going to have ample discussion about this over budget season. I'm not really anticipating needing a report on it then. I'm more interested in if we cross the first dog threshold or the second dog threshold, I think is.
I could include it in my regular quarterly reports,
Okay.
if you would
Why don't we do
like.
that? Let's do it.
I intended on doing that anyway.
Yeah, I figured you did. But I just want to tuck it in here just in case. So we'll say something along the lines of, City Council will receive updates on the fundraising initiative for the dog at every quarterly report from the Chief of Police?
Yes.
Okay. I'll make a motion to amend this resolution to add that language.
I'll second.
Okay.
Motion and a second. Discussion from council.
I think we all would, I would all like to know when the funds start coming in, you know, and so we can all keep track of this, and to have it publicized all the time, it would keep the public excited also. And the other thing that I liked about the list too, Chief, is that there are certain things that people can donate money for, to state what they want here. So, you know, there's certain ways that this can be done, but I agree with you, Liz, that this should be done only for the excitement to know how much is coming in and we can keep track of it.
All right. I am, so we'll insert that language, and I think it would be safe to say, Chief, we know that we'll be seeing updates on the arrangement for the first team, because we know that we'll be okaying those contracts and everything like that. And if we are approaching the threshold for a second team, I think that we would all appreciate understanding how that is happening as well, just so that we can kind of tally it and both celebrate it and keep an eye on that as well as we move forward. Any further, Randy?
As far as the fundraising and then the purchase of the dog, how is that, is that approved by council, that transaction? Or how is that accomplished?
Not to my knowledge, it's below the threshold. These are separate items. The purchase of the dog would be included in the $14,500
Okay.
for the training academy, so it falls below the threshold. If we came up to to that, then we would need to bring it before you, or at least that's the way it's been explained to me. I don't believe that we would need to do that unless there was a contract, which we were talking about for training.
Okay.
So in this case, it would be Mr. Karsnack's contract, and then it would just be the regular reporting of fundraising. The fundraising, I've talked to Mr. DeBartolomeo and Mr. Bailey, is going to be people that they know, who've already, in many cases, come to them and told them that they want to contribute money. Other people have called me as well, and some people are willing to donate large amounts of money, but we just haven't gotten to this point yet. So they're like waiting in the wings to do so. So that's it.
Great. Other comments? Questions? Okay, well, gentlemen, we thank you for the presentation and all your hard work that's gone into this. Hearing nothing else, Mr. Lubin on the motion, please.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Motion passes.
Mr. Ellis, point of order. Is that was that the amendment?
Amendment? Or that was-
Oh, that was I'm sorry, yeah. That was the amendment.
Ready for the
Okay,
final
the
vote?
amendment passes.
Okay.
Are there any other proposed amendments? Yes.
I just want to double check that other members of council, I mean, I know I can be a bit of a fiscal conservative sometimes, and so I'm happy to yield on this point, but no one else feels that it would be wise for us to be apprised or to approve purchases of the dogs, just so that we have another opportunity for discussion of the impact that it's having on the department and all of that. No one else thinks that we need to see that come before us? Okay, just.
Mr. Henderson?
I would say because it's to a degree, this is outside of the budget. I guess the only effect we really are looking for is how it's affecting our man-hours budget, overtime and that kind of thing.
Right.
And so I guess I'm thinking to myself, we can still control that in our budget discussions.
Except if we've acquired the animals, then we have less of an opportunity to control that. That's my only concern.
Right. Well,
Is that
that's true.
it's a discussion that we're wise to have before we have 3 dog teams, and then we don't wish to add the staff that would allow us to properly maintain those. So that's my concern, is that I don't want us somehow or another to get swung into a situation where we have a number of dog teams and we have not yet dealt with the 2020 budget. And all of a sudden, we're saying, well, we have to, regardless of the budgetary situation, we have to add 2 new staff members in the police department because we have to have enough staff to care for these animals. That's my concern, is I don't think it's liable to happen that quickly, and I'm not necessarily making that case, but I personally don't feel comfortable committing myself to anything that might impact the 2020 budget before I've seen the 2020 budget. So that's my issue there. But, obviously, everything passes on the basis of 6 votes, so I'm not looking at language or anything like that if no one else on council necessarily agrees that that's an item for concern.
I think the chief knows what his budget is going to be.
Yeah,
Well, we don't know what the budget is, though.
I know, but he knows where his budget, there is
We don't know his budget yet.
Right.
We're going to
But
set his
I know
budget.
he's probably working on it.
I know, but that's not going to be the final budget.
Not finalized.
Yeah.
I can talk a little bit about it.
Well,
I like I said earlier, we would like to have more officers, and we may not get them. If we do not get them, then we would be working with what we have, and the 3 officers would need to train every 2 weeks, which might,
right.
occasionally on a shift here and there, cause a shift of overtime, depending on whether there were a few people sick or on vacation or something like that. We'd have to be willing to pay that on occasion, and I think we can handle that. Going forward, we have to look at the size of the department. That's a different discussion completely. But getting more officers would be a way to alleviate that form of overtime and every other that we come in contact with. So I think we're okay at 48 or 47. We're budgeted for 47. We have 48 right now, but one is deployed overseas. So we have 47 working right now, and we are okay for these teams with what we have now. I don't see a problem. It's just my concern going forward is a strategy that depends on too much overtime. I believe over the past 15 years we've done that, and I am not fond of the idea of deploying tired and cranky officers into the field who haven't gotten enough sleep. They need their time off. They need to recover, and so a strategy that requires too much overtime is not a good strategy going forward, in my opinion.
I think what we're trying to balance, Chief, is that we appreciate the big picture approach to this.
Yes, sir.
With not just one team, but 3 teams. At the same time, we want to be able to assimilate. We don't want to bite off more than we can chew without knowing that we're doing it, I think, from our point of view, from council. We don't have the total numbers yet and everything. So I guess one question would be, do you have, you have a sense of somewhat of the pool of money that you're initially going to be able to get, but you don't, there's no way to extrapolate that out to the whole fundraising once it gets underway. But do you have some kind of timeline that you imagine it would take to get 3 teams? Or is that just going to be contingent upon how quickly the money's raised?
Contingent upon that, and also, maybe even more importantly than that, the identification of 3 officers who are suitable for this line of work. We have a very talented team of people who are going to interview people and go to their homes and probably talk to their neighbors and make sure that they have the facilities for this. And then they're going to have to go through a pretty rigorous training. And then they're going to have to come back here and go through Mr. Karsnack's training before he says it's okay for them to go do that. And that's a lot of stuff.
Right.
So we are assuming that that's all going to happen. Assuming that it does, the fundraising, I think, will come pretty quickly, certainly for the first 2 teams. I can't say how quickly it will for the third. That's a little more than $90,000 total. I think what we're looking at is probably over the next 2 years. I think my goal was to get 1 team in place by the end of this year. I don't know if we'll be able to do that now, and then 2 next year. That was a goal I had, an initial goal, but I don't know how quick the fundraising will come.
Right.
If we identify the officers and the fundraising comes, we're looking at probably about an 8-year commitment for each team. If we acquire the teams all within a year or 2, then that means we have a period of time, 7, 8 years, assuming the dogs stay healthy, where we're going to have to decide again whether we have the resources down the road to do this all over again and replace these officers. The great thing about it is we've done all this already, and we
Right.
know some of us are still old enough, we're still around from back when it happened, so we can do it again, and we can support it. It'll be all right. The issue is, are we going to get lucky? Are they going to stay healthy? We do what we can to accommodate the needs of the officers and to keep, to create the sort of interest and incentive for them to stay in the program longer by allowing them to promote up through the ranks, all the way, in some cases, to the rank of lieutenant, while they still have a dog. So they're not discouraged because they have to stay at the officer rank. So that helps to encourage them to stay in it. But, yeah, I mean, we're going to do, if we did it now, then we're looking at 7, 8 years probably down the road, doing it all over again.
Right.
So, yes, sir, if that helps.
Well, you've been excellent in your ability to communicate with us on council and keep in contact. You reach out to us, and you're always there for us when we reach out to you. So I think we have a good relationship already, and as we grow that, we can, I think, the things that we're concerned about, we can do conversationally and through the rapport that we already have.
I agree, sir. I think
You're
we
not
can.
one that is going to spring big surprises on people.
No, sir.
And you definitely clear the deck before the action starts. So appreciating that, and I think we can answer our concerns that way as well.
Absolutely.
But it's important that we air everything out in public. Mayor Campana,
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to calm some of the concerns and some of the questions in regards to the budget. We are in the early stages of that, and Mr. Nichols can confirm that oftentimes when the preliminary budgets come before my desk, first thing I do is I pull out the red pen and I delete quite a bit. So I just want to let everybody know that we're not committed to administration. I'm not committed to a certain amount of employees in the city. I have to take a look at the preliminary budget. We go through there, and then wherever I feel comfortable with the final number, that's what we bring to city council.
and we appreciate that, Mayor Campana. I think right now, we've been going on the 3-year projection that we've gotten. The first year was pretty accurate, so, but that's your job and the administration's job to do
Hopefully,
the hard work before it gets to us.
thank you. Hopefully before the end of the year, in regards to that 3-year financial plan, we talked about divesting properties. And hopefully, the administration and city council can get to that point where we're looking at selling some excess properties in the city. And at the next finance meeting, I want to talk to city council in regards to our plans for the end of the year.
Okay, I think that'd be good. I want to start early rather than later. Mr. Henderson?
Just back to the discussion at hand and this resolution. These are all great concerns, you know, obviously with the budget. At some point, I think what you just alluded to, Mr. Allison, was that at some point, this is in the hands of the administration, and we trust the administration to manage well within the bounds of the, you know, within the limits of the budget constraints that we give them. And I would agree with your statement that if our police chief does not feel that he's going to be able to keep within those bounds, and that's going to affect the decision he makes whether or not he purchases another dog. You know, and I'm trusting that he wouldn't hold that over us, and you know, kind of twist our arm in order to get more. And I don't think that would happen. And so we kind of have to work within those bounds. You know, we have limits as to what our power is, and the administration has that management authority, and we have to yield to that. And so I think at some point you just got to see there's the line. But we do everything we can to make sure that the financial decisions that we're making are not committing ourselves to have to raise taxes even more or whatever. And I totally understand that. But there's that line, and we have to respect that line as well.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's it. We're ready for the final vote on this resolution.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Lubin. Motion passes. Thank you, Chief Hagan.
Thank you.
We'll move to item 12, accept for filing public safety minutes of 6/18/19 and the Controller's report for July 2019. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion, corrections? Hearing none. Mr. Lubin?
Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes, motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Lubin. And finally, item 13, announcements. Our next regularly scheduled city council meeting will be Thursday, September 26th at 2019 at 7:30 p.m. in city council chambers. Upcoming meetings, Monday, September 16th, 12 p.m. Planning Commission. Tuesday, September 17th, 10 a.m. Blighted Property, 3:30 p.m. ERC, 6:30 p.m. HARB. Wednesday, September 18th, 4 p.m. Quarterly Pension Review. Thursday, September 19th, 10:30 a.m. Zoning Hearing Board, 4 p.m. Board of Health. Tuesday, September 24th, 11 a.m. Historical Preservation Committee, 1 p.m. Finance Committee, 2:30 p.m. Public Works, 3:30 p.m. Public Safety, and 7 p.m. Citizens Corps. Wednesday, 11:30 a.m. Redevelopment Authority, and then Thursday, the 26th is our last council meeting in September. Items from council tonight? No items from council. Items from the administration?
No comment.
No items from the administration. Public comment tonight? Yes, sir.
My name is Frank Steckel, live 619 First Ave. I'm the Democratic Committee person, man. for the 12th Ward. We had a lot of gas company work, I had a couple issues. We had a lot of gas company work done on my street in Park Place recently. The sidewalks are all a mess. Historically, they've been a mess for decades. I've talked to a couple department heads, and they've been very helpful. But, for example, on Second Ave, a friend of mine put in a new sidewalk, and a few years later, the government came in and tore out his sidewalk to put in a new sidewalk and curb, okay? So he lost thousands of dollars. I just had a neighbor put in a new sidewalk, and if the city eventually goes through what they'd like to do, they're gonna rip his sidewalk out. So, and technically, I don't think anybody can put a legal sidewalk in that area that would be high enough. It's a job for the city. It's a job for government, just like building a bridge or an airport or anything else. It's a large job. It has to be coordinated. It can't be done by individuals. Now, I've heard a couple of different prospects. Perhaps a curb would be put in with the new paving that the gas company is going to do. And I mean, I'm just talking about my little neighborhood. I don't know, this probably would extend over a lot of neighborhoods, possibly, if they don't have curbs existing already. Most do, I think. But it's only a block away or 2 blocks away from all the work we're seeing done on Waitman Block on Campbell. So there's an issue with the height of the curb. If the sidewalk is going to be lower than the height of the curb, there's going to be flooding. And that's another issue with the flooding altogether, what to do with all this wastewater. And I've talked to different department heads, and they have different ideas. Some sound more sound than others, okay? Some intimated they might want to take one parcel on a block and make it a drainage area like Walmart has, all these, you know, I'm thinking everybody's familiar with that. You know, they usually have a pond for excess water so that it doesn't flood the whole valley all the way down to the Chesapeake, right? Other people, I think more, it seems like a better idea to have reservoirs put in down along the dike, if it's possible, to handle the whole city. Because right now, I mean, you have a situation where the curbs, if they put them in, are 6 inches higher than the sidewalks. Where's the water going to go? You technically can't put a drain through the curb anymore because of the federal guidelines, I guess. And it's just a complete mess with no guide. I mean, somebody at the top, somebody in management, somebody like the mayor or the head of council or somebody has to step forward, or the federal government, you have to get together with them, the state, whomever, and come up with some kind of a plan, you know? This is a major issue all across the city. My neighborhood is really bad. Water comes off the street and down the sidewalk like a trout stream. It's 5 inches deep, you know? And the water coming off the houses, you figure how much square foot of roof and street there is compared to grass. You're not going to get away with dumping the water into a 5% of the area that, you know, if that's grass, you know. And money's being spent poorly by individuals and hopefully not by the government. So, you know, I mean, I don't think this is such a far-fetched concept here. I mean, do you have anything you can, or maybe the mayor knows something he can ask or say that?
Stormwater in general is a front line issue with the city right now, and we are looking for ways to address that in a comprehensive way, because the kinds of things you're describing are happening in a lot of neighborhoods, some even more pronounced than that, obviously, the Graffius Run thing and all of that. So,
Yeah.
We need a stormwater management plan that addresses those kinds of things and brings in a conformity, but also that meets the needs of separate areas. So obviously that's not done overnight, but we're in the process of moving that ahead. So I think those kinds of things are going to be addressed. As far as curb height and that issue, I'd have to talk to Mr. Girardi about that, and I'll ask him how they enforce that across the...
I myself would like to see curbs put in, even if there is some flooding coming from the, off the roofs, because that would be the first step toward putting in the sidewalks and the whole, you know, thing. but at least it would keep the storm water off of the sidewalks that's currently going from the street onto the sidewalks. It would take it to where it has to go to the I don't know how you would warn the public. I don't know if the word warn is, if there was something in a newspaper perhaps, to tell people, if you're considering a sidewalk, call codes, call the city, because this is what could happen. This is what's already happened to some people. And if you're gonna, really through the newspaper is the only way I could think that would be a way to address.
Yeah, that wouldn't probably be that difficult to do. We already do coordinate with utilities. We tell them we're going to repave the street, so get your work done before we come in and do it. So we could alert homeowners to that.
Do you think something could go out to the public?
I think we can certainly investigate that and talk about.
That would,
We have a website.
Because one of the options I heard through some of these offices are that if the city can't afford to do the curb and the sidewalk, they might go to each individual, maybe send them letters out like you do for a zoning variance, and say, we're interested in doing this. I don't know if it's been done before. I'm sure it's been done somewhere. I don't know here. If the cost could be split between the landowner and the city somehow, or some kind of arrangement can be made to make it more economically viable for the city to do the job correctly the first time and have it finished, like they did on Second Ave. I'm not really familiar with Second Ave, except that, like I said, my friend put a new sidewalk in, and they ripped it out and put in new curbs and sidewalks. So, other than that, I don't have too much to say now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. No other questions? Mr. Lubin, did we have an executive session?
That I'm aware of.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.